Tired of losing with the black pieces against 1e4? Well, why don't you try to play the Rubinstein variation of the French defense next time? In this video, you will learn what kind of position does it lead to and some of the main ideas that you absolutely need to know for the black pieces. I would like you to view these videos on openings like movie trailers, where you get a general idea of what movie is about, so that you could decide whether you want to invest more time into it or not. So this opening starts after white plays e4 and black plays e6. We have ourselves a French defense. White takes over the middle and plays d4, and here black responds with d5. Now, the most theoretical probably variations of the French defense comes after white plays knight c3 and knight to d2. For example, after knight c3, if white is preparing to play the French defense, he has to spend a lot of time at looking at these lines of bishop b4 called the Rubinstein Variation, which could lead to very, very sharp positions, and both players are required to know what they're doing from theory point of view. Perhaps even a better move objectively could be knight d2, and it could lead to many different variations. Black could be playing moves c5, they could be playing moves knight f6, and even in those sidelines, white really has to be booked up. However, we as black, against both moves knight c3 and knight d2, are gonna just simply take the pawn and enter the so-called Rubinstein Variation. A lot of the amateurs like to view this as sort of a sideline, so I feel like it's very likely that your opponents will not be booked up in this variation, and if you know what you're doing, I hope that you can equalize very early on with the black pieces. The best part about it is that even if white knows what he's doing and they know a lot of theoretical moves, Rubinstein Variation, even objectively, is a good variation to play, and even in correspondent chess, it equalizes at the top level where people use all the books in the world and the engines. If you're interested in the advanced variation, which comes after e5, I have made a video on that, and I will leave a link to that video in the description under this video. So imagine that our opponents play knight c3 or knight d2, then we're going to take the pawn, they have nothing else but taking, and we're going to play the move knight to d7. The basic idea of this move is to play knight to f6 on the second move, and then we're going to take back if they take with our own knight. At first, I would like to show you a sequence of natural moves that is the likeliest position you're going to end up in, and I believe that in that position you only need to know one idea and black is out of trouble. So white is just developing with knight to f3. Seems to be very natural. Black is attacking the knight in the middle with knight to f6. Even though we're going to be looking here at bishop d3 at the end of the video and c3, and these perhaps objectively are slightly bit better moves, to the eye of an unprepared player, bishop d3 is not a move they would be intending to play, because they might think that after takes and takes they're losing the tempo. Of course, white here has bishop g5 move, but I think that if you're not prepared, then it's likely that they're going to take on f6, black is going to take back, and simply developing the bishop to the most active square. So far, white makes all very natural and at the same time good moves. My recommendation is to strike immediately back in the middle with c5. We want to undermine their space advantage that is generated from this pawn on d4. And if we take these pawns away, white only has a slight lead in development in the position. So we're playing c5, they're accepting the pawn. If they play c3, a little problem for them is that after c takes d4, if they take with the pawn, they end up with isolated pawn. Not everyone's cup of tea. After knight takes d4, the position is perhaps close to equal, because black can play bishop to c5 and b6, bishop b7 very soon castles, and the development seems to be quite easy and natural. We don't have to be coming up with anything that is artificial over there. So usually opponents take on c5, bishop takes, then castles, very natural moves, bishop to g5, Another very natural move, just pinning the knight. Black has to solve the problem of their light square bishop, so we play b6. Now queen to e2, preparing rook d1 and attacking our queen. Again, everyone could think of that move. We're gonna play bishop to b7, and our bishops are looking quite dangerous against the opponent's king. And after rook a d1, that's the idea that you need to remember, that you are not afraid if in the Rubinstein variation or in this position if you get damaged pawn structure on the king side, because otherwise you're always intending to leave the queen on e7 and d8 squares, and you will lose flexibility because you will have to babysit that knight on f6 all the time. So actually black can play queen to c7, and if they take on f6 and we take back, white doesn't have enough resources to attack our king on g8. For example, this bishop might be looking scary at h7, but soon enough we're gonna play f5. We can play bishop to e7, bishop f6 to watch over the dark squares, or rook to d8 and then bishop f8, bishop g7, and there is just no way for them to conduct a kingside attack. That is very important, as a lot of the people would not enter this without knowing that black is okay. And currently in this position, black has the bishop pair, which is an advantage, I believe, and white has probably nothing better than exchanging one of the bishops of black's to take away the bishop pair advantage. And for example, black plays rook f to d8. Some games have seen c3, rook a c8. At some point, we're exchanging the bishops. White is going to be the one that is taking, and this position is already very, very close to equal. Another thing to remember is that black wants to usually exchange the rooks so that they could activate their own queen via the d file, as white's queen could usually find activity via squares like e3 and e4. So for example, rook to d3, takes was a game that was played by Kalifman, FIDE world champion, with the black pieces, and then very soon black exchanged all pair of rooks and managed to activate their own queen, and the game was led to an drawish or equal waters where black has no problems. Now, this is the most common variation that I think you're going to end up playing with the black pieces. If white is not prepared to be precise in this opening, this whole sequence of very natural moves, and sometimes it feels like white should have pressure, lead to just total equality, and black can get out of the opening without even thinking. Now let's take a look at some ambitious tries for white. In the same variation, I would like to repeat the first moves so that they would stay with your memory a little bit better. Knight takes f6, knight takes f6, and here white has an option to play c3. At first glance, it feels like it's very innocuous, harmless move, but this move actually is intending to do quite aggressive things against the black. First of all, white wants to play all sort of queen e4s and bishop b5s if you are going to play c5, as well as knight e5 and castles long. So from the first glance, it feels like a move is very slow, but then if we're going to be playing slowly as well with bishop to e7, white is actually going to build up quite a pressure. For example, castles, I do not recommend bishop e7, but just to show you why this variation is known as something that is very aggressive. Bishop f4, bishop b7 and no castle, and black's problems are actually not solved at all here. In this position, I'm very scared about my own king on the king side. I'm not sure how black is going to conduct their own attack, like queen can't just jump over to a5. Pieces are not easily coming to the queen side. White has plans of just bombarding the king side and open up the G and H files, and even objectively, Engine agrees that white has here a good game. So instead, after they're playing this move c3, we're going to play a dynamic move c5, and as always try to undermine the space advantage that they have. Here, the main move is knight e5. This intends to check with bishop to b5, and then if we block this check, they're going to grab the bishop pair, and white is again going to be better in the long run. Of course, we don't want to go back, because that's just moving the piece back to the initial square. Not total initial square, but it's making the knight worse. So we're going to prevent that, and we're going to be playing a6. then the main move here is bishop to e3, creating a threat to take the pawn on c5. Now we're defending that. And after queen a4 check, we're going to be playing knight to d7, because if we play bishop to d7, we're losing the bishop pair. However, this knight d7 right now is not so bad, because it turns out that the queen is actually quite misplaced on a4. Besides giving the spin over here, she doesn't generate any other type of activity, and if it wasn't for the pin, I believe that the queen of whites should be perhaps even on the king side. So the main move here for white is bishop to b5. If they take, of course, we're more than happy. This is Christmas for black. And we cannot take actually the bishop on b5 because the rook on a8 is hanging. Another move that has been tried was also castles. So Mickey Adams, Anand are the players that have tried this with white, but it is considered that this is not very harmful for black. For example, we can take on d4, then there is massive exchanges. Usually it takes on d7. They can't take back with the pawn because of that. Bishop to c6, and after rook d8, black is very close to equal. For example, the queen might be running away, and black might be wondering how I'm going to defend the pawn on g7. Then black would play h5. You don't go to g3 because we swap queens. This is not what white wants, as it seems like black king is actually in trouble. Say queen to g5, and now g6. And this rook could come to c8, b5, b4 coming, bishop to e7, and if bishop d4 is played, then it's Christmas time for black, because after bishop h6 we're winning the queen. So I think that bishop b5 makes sense from both practical and objective point of view. Black here usually takes on d4, then there are these massive exchanges, and after f6, knight takes, queen takes, king takes, which is theoretical. We enter an endgame, which is basically one of the worst positions you can get from the Rubinstein Variation, but there were quite a few games. I see 11 games, Grandmaster games in the database. Black needs to be precise here, but fortunately they all ended up in a draw, which is what you're more than happy with when you're playing these big boys that have GM letters next to their name when they're playing chess. Grandmaster, this is what it means. So this was the line that was popularized, I believe, by Garry Kasparov. I'm not sure if it's called Kasparov Variation. Maybe it's called a Kasparov attack, but he was the one that was playing this quite a lot against the French defense. And the last variation that I would like to give you an introduction to is the move. Let's take a look from the start. I always think this is good for the memory. And at this point, this move bishop d3, which perhaps objectively is the best way to try and get an advantage with white. This is a move that usually don't play unprepared because it feels like they might be losing a tempo, but actually after bishop to g5, white has some pressure and they're not releasing the tension of the middle, and if black exchanges pieces, white's pieces are getting more active. So here, if you're interested in playing something unorthodox, then this is one of the positions that black has been playing a lot. So it is possible to play this way. I'm gonna give you another line, but if you're interested in perhaps playing more for a win with more imbalances, that's the way to go with the black pieces. Now, against bishop to d3, I myself recommend the move c5 immediately in both the previous and this line, not waiting. White usually castles, then we're taking on e4, knight f6, attacking the bishop, they're pinning with bishop to g5, and here we're simply taking and taking on d4. So white is slightly bit better because white has 3 pieces in the center, castled king. But what we have out of all this is no weaknesses, and if we are able to develop our army, in theory we're completely equal here, as white doesn't have any kind of pawn in the center that would generate more central control or a long-term space advantage. So black just plays bishop to e7, starts developing, then they have to remove the bishop as it's under attack. So bishop f3 is really annoying for white. This is, I think, better than leaving the bishop on d3. castles, and believe it or not, queen d3 is the most principal reaction from white's point of view. They want to just double up. And here I will recommend the move queen b6, which was played by an Ukraine, I believe Ukraine grandmaster Drozdovsky a couple of times. And against Karakin, he actually managed to almost equalize, then lost, of course, because Karakin is Karakin, but in the opening stage he was doing very, very well. And the game followed rook a d1 by Karakin, rook d8 by black. Black is already close to finish the development. The only piece that hasn't come to the game yet is bishop from c8. Now bishop to e3, trying to discover, attack the queen. Queen a5. It is not recommended to be taking the pawn there on b2, because with the skewer and attack on b7, white will get compensation for the pawn that was lost. And if you take more pawns, then you're risking of getting your queen trapped. So a lot of the times this b2 pawn in many openings is very, very poisonous. So we play rook d8, bishop e3, queen e5, and white plays queen to b5 because another exchange is offered, after which white develops initiative. For example, if we takes, and I'll look at these two bishops and the knight coming to c7, mamma mia, I don't want to watch it any further, let's go back, and the right move here is queen to c7. So we are threatening bishop d7, so queen b3 makes sense. Bishop d7, finally almost finishing development. c4 was played by Karakin, and here if black just played rook a c8 attacking the pawn, say rook c1 and b6, this is already, I think, close to equality. From the eyeball test, I still maybe slightly would pick white, but black is just super solid and engine gives a totally zeros here. Not saying that white played all perfect moves, but it is close to something that is considered the main line. And I believe that when you're preparing for the openings, first go with the quantity, look at a lot of the games without trying to memorize anything. Then the next step is to go for quality, which is trying to make sense of the move order and very concrete ideas. And the third thing that I would recommend doing is actually playing that opening against bots. So you watch the video, then you can look at, say, 10 games. The next thing I would like you to do is to study the move order a little bit and try to be precise in it. And then I would be playing against any kind of bot of your preference or any kind of player online that is your buddy, and play with both colors this position like 10 times. Because usually when you start a new opening, you have a lot of big blunders and errors in the starting moves that you don't want to be losing points for. So rather lose to some bots, don't lose the rating points, and then you will be ready to meet this e4 with confidence after e6. So I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the Rubinstein Variation. There is so much to cover, and I'm sure I have left a lot away, but these particular lines were the ones that I think are the most important above all. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my chess channel. You can also consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. My contacts are on the right, and I will see you in the next video. Stay safe, my friends, and best of luck in your games.